Welcome back to Why Blank Lost for Survivor 45, or as we call it this time every season, Why Blank Won.
That's right. Here we are. Oh, my word.
I'm David Bloomberg, and joining me as always is my co-host, a somewhat sad Jessica Lewis, because her winner pick couldn't get there in the end.
I am so sad because, as I said in the last podcast, I was manifesting a Jake win. And when the episode started, I was like, oh, my word. Maybe this is working because he was killing it in the beginning. He was doing so great. He had the idol, then he won the advantage. And I was like, oh my word. And there was all this Jake content and it was positive. And I was like, here we go. This is it. This is my moment. And then it all went to shit.
I like how you say this is your moment, not Jake's
it was my moment.
It was your moment.
Jake, it was my moment. I'm sorry, but it was mine because I was finally going to have. And the fact that he mentioned JT, I was like, that was my last winner pick. So it's destiny. It was meant to be.
Oh, it was destiny,
Jake.
all right. Yeah.
Yeah. I picked you as my winner pick, so you were destined to not win. I was so excited, and then it just everything. Yeah. I mean, and to Jake's credit, great casting to get Jake on the show. He's fantastic. Just even though everything fell apart at the end, he really did.
I mean, to be fair, it fell apart a lot earlier than at the end, but yes.
It did. But I will just say, he was a constant just joy, despite all of the hardships that he was going through on the island, and just everything about that final episode surrounding Jake was just, it was like one more thing. Like, really? Now this is happening? It's like, come on. Oh yeah, it was.
Imagine how he felt,
comedic.
But yeah, I really enjoyed him. I just knew he couldn't win. I could tell from the edit that he was destined to be, the 0 vote finalist type spot,
manifesting it,
or lose in fire, one of the two. Well, and that shows how good manifesting is.
I know. It clearly didn't work. So, anywho, I am still very proud of Jake because at least he did make it to the final 3. Yes. I'm getting better, maybe, because I'm picking people that are making it to the final 3 at least. But still, no.
You'll get there, Jessica.
See, that positive.
That's right.
Reinforcement. I appreciate that so much.
Yes.
So yes, but I am sad, but still I'm very proud of at least being so entertained by Jake. So thank you for doing that at least.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, loved watching Jake. I mean, the cast was amazing overall.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
And the 90-minute episodes really enabled us to get to know them. So
yes. I really hope that stays.
Took the words out of my mouth. Yes. I mean, we know it is next season.
Yes.
And I hope it continues, after that. And I think that, I mean, this was a great cast on top of that. So hopefully we'll have something similar going forward.
Yeah. I always feel like every season there's that one player, maybe two that it's interesting that they've kept them out of the edit so much, considering the things that they have done.
Yeah.
And so I don't feel like that's what happened this particular season. I know Julie said some things about being a little more absent at the beginning, but that's because Reba kept winning. Yeah. So, they didn't really have much to show about the winning tribe, but I do still feel like we were able to learn so much more about each player, which was so nice because I do feel as a Survivor player, when you go out there and you're putting yourself in front of the world in this way, it's nice to actually be like, oh, look, that was me. I did that, and that you get some recognition for the things that you do. So the fact that they're able to not just show the game mechanics, but also the relationships and back at the on the camp life, just all of these things that we seem to miss out on, I think is just really lovely. And I like the backstories on the players as well. I know some people weren't as keen on that. I think sometimes it can be a little too much, but at the same time, it's nice to get to know people and that personal level. So I do appreciate that being built in too.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's move on. And well, before we do, Jessica, I don't mean to be presumptuous.
Oh no.
But I just wanted to let you know, I think you should consider becoming a lawyer.
You think so?
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea. You should go to law school.
Okay, I'll duly note it.
Yeah.
That was amazing. That both of them said it to her too.
I know. It's like
hilarious, absolutely hilarious, and just to have that. And you know what's so good about that? Excuse me. It's like that you can be like reassured that your choice was correct. You're like, oh, I'm glad I did go to law school, because apparently people think I should go to law school. Yeah, that was great. Love that.
People told me I should have gone to law school, but I just had to content myself with telling the lawyers what to do. So,
and I'm sure that you love that more.
Yes, I did. Of course, my boss was also a lawyer, so I guess she told me what to do. So, it all came full circle.
It evens out.
Yeah. Yeah, I as far as the finale, other than the parts we've already discussed, I do think, despite your hopes for Jake, it was a little predictable once we got past the 2-1-1-1 final 5 vote. I mean, to me, it was obvious Dee would win at that point.
Well, and then when she won final immunity, it was like, we're done.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, the only thing that went a little differently was after the big uplifting Katurah segment before fire making. I thought, oh wow, after all this, turns out she's going to beat Jake in fire. No, that was not happening.
No. That was the one thing Jake really just did amazing at. So
yeah. All right. Well, while this podcast is, of course, primarily about why Dee won, we will still follow our usual path to figure out what actually happened, comparing all of the Final Fives games to my rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season 1. I've been updating ever since, using all the non-spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, interviews, social media, and secret scenes. And we even have from all those categories this time.
Crazy.
Yeah. The newest version of the rules can be found on the website by going to our dedicated page at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed and clicking on the link bubble for the Survivor rules. Now, I always mention, as I just did, that this goes back to season 1. And I did want to note that after episode 11, Rob was doing know-it-alls, and I don't remember how the conversation got there, but he brought out his All-Stars pregame prep binder that he still has.
Nice.
And mostly it's like individual pages for each player that he thought might be on the show. And after he went through that, he turned and he gave me a shout out because he also had the Pearl Islands version of my rules in there.
Oh, look at that.
So I meant to bring it up last week, but my brain just wasn't fully functioning because I was sick. But in any case, thanks to Rob for the mention. And yeah, it's a reminder of just how long I've been at this. And
you really have been.
And the thing is, that was, the second version that he studied, because the earlier version he took with him when he originally went out through the Amazon. So
it's so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been around for a long time doing this.
Yes, I have.
It's impressive.
I have. All right.
And you continue to update, which is also fascinating.
Yes.
It's not getting stale.
No, you've got to. So it'll be updated a little bit. I mean, I don't envision huge changes after this season, but it'll be updated a little bit for next season.
Maybe you can include in there, don't break the challenge.
Yeah,
that's a first.
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to remind everyone before we get started is that because we have to talk about 5 players, we unfortunately can't give all of the time they deserve, or else we'd be here for like over 6-7 hours, which that's not happening. On the plus side, they didn't get a whole podcast devoted to themselves because they didn't lose earlier.
That's fair. See, it all balances out.
Yeah. So better than the Bulls. Yes. It took you a minute to process that. I know.
It did. I'm like, Bulls? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Those Bulls led to a broken challenge.
Yes. Now, before we get to our discussion of the rules, we usually have some other things to discuss from the week's episode, and even the finale is no exception, though we'll keep it short since we have a lot to discuss. In fact, really, the only person I want to talk about is continuing with Jake, because he had so much going on in this episode that was just pure entertainment. You know, first you mentioned he won the advantage challenge, but he did it not by remembering the number of crabs, bamboo, and coconuts, but by assigning those numbers to survivor winners.
Yeah, genius.
So not only did it work, that's a whole new level of super fandom that we're seeing.
Yes, I was very impressed, and I really like that whole buildup. It was almost like the little engine that could, because they kept like going back to Jake, and he's like, I can't run as fast, and so I have to come up with a different plan. And then for that to be the plan with Denise, JT, and Gabler, and it was just like, what an incredible like melding of everything, right? Where like we're watching Survivor, it's the final episode, and then he's utilizing the knowledge base that he has, which probably helped him get on the show, to then win the challenge. It was really incredible to watch. So yes, very impressive for sure.
Yeah. Now, another thing that amused me was after the final 5 tribal council, watching Jake explain how pissed he was that he couldn't vote out Dee to Dee. It was like he was so mad. It didn't even seem to occur to him that he was complaining to her about not being able to vote her out. It's like, Katurah changed it and I couldn't get rid of you. It's like.
And then Dee's like, well, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. You're so kind. Oh, I know. And it's like he just couldn't catch a break. He just couldn't. But that was a big mess up right there, which I'm sure we'll be touching upon.
Yeah, he could catch a break because, as you already mentioned, he caught a break of the challenge.
Oh, look at you.
Yes. I mean, it was, he was trying to hurry through. He thought it could work. It did not work. And Jeff sounded so annoyed, which made it even funnier.
Which also, like that whole, like when Jake started doing it, I'm like, he looked pissed. Like he didn't look like he was trying to like like that he was like, I don't know, that he had thought this through, like, oh, this is a better idea. It was like, boom. It's like he was angry. So then that just did make it even more funny when later he was like, no, I thought about it, and I thought this would just make it go faster for me.
Yeah.
As opposed to I'm just mad and I'm just going to step on the entire challenge. But now I guess that'll be something Jeff will have to inform the players that if you break it, you're done. Because I've never seen that before. Ever.
I mean, there was something similar when Owen broke his stick for the challenge at the similar point.
Oh, okay.
When they had to go through the maze and stack them.
But he kept going.
No, he was done by that point. It was pretty much over at that point. But if something had happened, like Cassidy's had dropped or something like that, then he would have been SOL because he broke the stick. But it was too late. The funny part was Owen even joked on Twitter before the challenge.
I did see that.
He said, I'm glad to see they fixed it for Austin or whatever, whoever was using that color. So not knowing, of course, that something else would break.
Yes.
So, all right. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss before we move on?
No, I think we have so much to discuss just overall. We can definitely move on. I really want to touch upon Jake's awesomeness, which we did.
Yes. Now, normally we'd have our Jeff Probst is wrong about blank segment, but in this case, he was right about something. It was just something that must have pained him to no end as he talked to Dalton Ross about Dee's winning game. Now, we'll talk about it more as we go on, but spoiler alert, it didn't involve Jeff's favorite big moves. And, he had to talk about all the things he'd done, which it just must have ripped him up inside to admit that, that was how she played.
Yeah, I do agree that there are times that perhaps maybe the big moves isn't what gets you there.
Yeah. like every time. Now, I, of course, have a few other thoughts, but I have already put some out or will later in TikToks, so people can check those out at David Bloomberg TV. Before we figure out how the final five did, we just need to mention that the rules we're about to discuss come in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster
Yes, I
form.
do.
So go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster and click on it. Obviously too late for holiday giving, but New Year's present.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Or just an everyday present, just because we all love Survivor.
That's right. Then you can also scroll down and see get the poster on a t-shirt, and you could scroll down further and see the shirts that we are wearing, which is the checklist t-shirt. Now, Jessica has the red long sleeve in worn the appropriate way. I, for the occasion of the winner, as I usually do, am wearing the shirt backwards for why blank one. So
I had to honor my winner pick.
So if he had won, you'd have worn it backwards.
Yes. And well, here's the thing. And you should put why blank lost. It should be added because Jessica chose them as their winner pick.
Ooh.
Yeah, maybe that's another update.
We'll have to see if we can get a shirt, like Jessica chose me and therefore I lost.
I'm so sorry to all future Survivor players.
All right. Well, a few weeks ago when Austin brought up Boston Rob and Amber, I said Dee was in favor of it because it would mean Dee would win the $1 million. Lo and behold, here we are.
Yeah.
But this is a very different game from the one Amber won, and pretty much nothing is similar between those two players. Jeff said this season was about relationships and secrets within relationships, and that's partially true, but certainly does not tell anywhere near the whole story. We, however, do have that full story to tell. So sit back, relax, and watch or listen, because it's time to figure out why Dee won and Austin, Jake, Katurah, and Julie lost. Now, the first and most important rule is to scheme and plot, and I want to start here by not just talking about one person, but rather the whole of the Reba Four. So today it applies to Dee, Austin, and Julie, and reinforces what we said last week about Drew. I can't count the number of comments and replies I've seen and gotten across social media over the weeks of people not understanding how the Reba Four kept themselves hidden.
Now we know.
Well, right. But even back then, people were attacking the Bello for being stupid because it was obvious to us on TV that the Reba were together. So why wasn't it obvious to the other players?
Right.
But it wasn't just that the Bello were a bunch of Keystone cops. It's that they were outplayed. Dee told Dalton Ross, I wish that the audience really saw the Reba Four more. And that's because we were so close. We got up every single night in the middle of the night at 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's why people didn't notice our gameplay, because we would not be together during the day. We'd only get up in the middle of the night, completely sleep deprived. And, Kendra had mentioned how well they hid their closest in her interview with Rob way back after episode 9. But now we have these additional details to fill in the gaps.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say that this is, to me, a very impressive gameplay decision, because it's very tricky, for one, because you have no control. You don't know what time things are actually happening. You are sleep deprived. And the fact that you're able to get yourself up and focus on these game moves in the middle of the night when you really just want to be sleeping just speaks volumes to the dedication that they all had, to their desire to bring the game forward and also keep everything under wraps. So overall, great strategy, and it definitely worked. Allegedly, Bruce kind of stumbled upon them, though, at some point, but that didn't really cause any issues, which is good. But overall, I love that they were all on that same kind of level where we know how significant and important the four of us are, but we also know how important it is to not let other people see that. So the fact that they were able to balance all of that, just really incredible.
Yeah. And, again, it's the hiding part. And
Mm-hmm.
we saw a little of this, or actually a lot of it last season too, because the Tika 3 hid themselves and everybody was like, why are people not breaking up the Tika 3? We don't understand. And then it came out that Carson had a very close relationship, side alliance with Lauren, and Jam Jam had with Jamie. And so therefore they kept everybody focused
Mm-hmm.
on the wrong things. And that's the
Right.
same exact thing, essentially, that the Reba 4 here did. And the Reba 4 didn't even know that the Tika 3 had done that because that part of the show was airing while they were already in Fiji.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting to see this, this original alliance based game coming back.
Yes. And here's the thing. I realize that there's been a lot of commentary on social media as well that this is kind of boring. It's not so much fun because it's just four people who are kind of leading the charge.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly it worked. It's a great strategy. It got them all to the end and got one of them $1 million. So it even though as entertainment, it might not be what we are all hoping for. As far as I want to win $1 million,
Mm-hmm.
great game move. Great.
Well, and I think it was entertaining because people didn't know, which may be one reason that the production kept it more hidden in both cases to kind of keep up that question, like, ooh, will they, won't they?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we heard, like I was just mentioning in the Survivor 44 side alliances, we heard in the finale and then in interviews that different Reba members brought in different side alliances to
Mm-hmm.
enhance the illusion. So Dee and Julie had Katurah, Drew and Austin had Emily, Jake was also in there at times, and this gave them effectively a majority for a while now. I mean, they didn't technically have it till Final 7, but they essentially had it. So they had been controlling the game.
Right.
And following up on what we just said, sometimes I DM back and forth with Survivor 43 James, and he said to me in one of them, alliances worked. What a concept.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I know that, like Kelly, when she had left and did interviews, she said the meta of the new era is that original tribal alliances don't hold. Well, I mean, obviously 46 is already in the can, so we'll see what happens for that. But I think if
Mm-hmm.
you're going out for 47 and 48, you better be watching for those tribal alliances and making them yourselves.
Yeah. Yep.
So now we discussed a little in a previous podcast, but also this overall control by the Reba 4 explains why people were piling votes on rather than splitting them.
Yes.
Because
Mm-hmm.
Emily had told Gordon Holmes that the way Reba was controlling things, they emphasized playing a loyal game, and if you didn't, you were dead to them. So people didn't want to throw a rogue vote and be seen as the next target because almost every person thought they were working with a Reba.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that really helped keep them covert because you don't have those splitting off of votes and you don't have people who are seemingly separating themselves. So it certainly helped. And I'm curious, it sounds as if this was kind of part of the plan too. And I love that it ended up becoming something that worked, even though again, as viewers were like, how are they not splitting the votes? What is happening? But this is why.
Yeah, because you can hide your alliance if literally everyone is voting the same way. We've discussed that on a previous podcast too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, within the Reba 4, it was hard to pinpoint one particular person making all the specific decisions. At one time, people thought it was mostly Dee. Others thought it was Drew. But according to what we saw, and more importantly, the interviews, it really was the whole group making the choices.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even though we saw Julie appear not to get her way a couple times in a row while Dee got what she wanted, interviews told us that wasn't the whole picture. And before that point, for example, Julie had gotten rid of one person that she wanted. And so therefore it was like Dee's turn almost.
Right. Yeah.
I suspect we saw it that way in the editing because they wanted to give Dee a clearer edit of like, oh, look, she's always getting her way. And,
right.
And that's not to downplay what Dee did, because she was obviously a big part of the decisions.
Yeah.
And, she did make sure when someone said her name, they were immediately targeted.
Yeah. They really did balance each other out incredibly well.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
four, in the way that they approached the game, the way that they approached other people, which I think truly helped them not appear to be as close to each other as they were, because they were so different in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Now, one thing that, as an example of what Dee did, she wanted to get rid of Kendra. And she told the others it was because Kendra was saying Dee's name. What she didn't tell them, but did explain in interviews, was that a big part of it was Kendra had caught on to her and Austin becoming closer.
Mm-hmm.
And, we did see Dee giving some mafia vibes as she would find out someone said her name, and that was it. They had to go.
Yeah.
She noted in the Final Five Tribal Council, if you hear your name, you have to immediately fire back with another name to make that other person a better option. And we saw her doing that all season. She told Rob, I know when to be cutthroat. I know when to make decisions quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, she clearly did so.
Yeah. Now, another thing she told Rob was that one of the most important factors in her game was always knowing what was going on. And that came from the way she surrounded herself with people who would pass information to her. I think all the viewers making fun of Dee for having 2 number ones now owe her an apology, because it definitely helped.
Yeah.
In the Final Five, she had both of those number ones giving her information and protecting her.
And both of her number ones wanted to bring her to the end with them.
Yeah.
So you're just creating more options and opportunities for yourself by having 2 number ones.
Right. As Julie said in the brief Jury Speaks segment, Dee insulated herself with people who had her back. And Katurah later tweeted, isn't it a testament to Dee's, great gameplay that at Final Five, there were 2 people who refused to write her name down.
Right.
And a third person needed rigorous convincing before agreeing to write her name. She'd already made the odds in her favor.
Yes. Very fair.
So while the Reba 4 all worked together, they also played their own individual games, even with Dee and Austin. There's a secret scene for the finale with Austin noting that we've seen power duos working together in the past, but the 2 of them were playing their individual games while also keeping each other safe and helping each other out. And that is something we don't often see on Survivor. It's hard to do that, to work so closely with someone, but also to, in a way, work against them. It reminds me of 2 professional athletes competing for the same position on a team. When they're in the game, they're helping each other because it's better for everyone. But they're also fighting for that spot to make their own lives better.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of mutual respect between the 2 of them, I think, stems from their want to compete. They are both individuals who made it very clear that that's what they wanted in this game. They both had their own strategies coming in, and they were able to create that existence for themselves by finding people early on who they could align with and aligning with each other. But it was nice that it wasn't personal. It was still gameplay. Even though there was a connection, they were still able to separate and know that one of the things that I thought was great that Austin had said that he would bring her to fire making if he had the opportunity to take her out. So they were planning these things, just as Dee was like, I'm not going to let Austin make fire. So they weren't helping each other win, but they were helping each other get there for the opportunity to win, but they were still going to compete.
Yeah. A perfect example of this is, of course, Dee lying about telling Julie that she was being targeted at Final 7 and leaving Austin out of the Drew plan at the very next vote. Most importantly, she saved the Julie tidbit as a little bomb to drop in Final Tribal Council. Austin did confirm in interviews what I had been saying to people who criticized him previously, that he knew if Julie found out about the attempted blindside, she'd vote out Emily, and that was okay with him. But it's a lot more difficult for him to explain that in Final Tribal Council than it was for Dee to make it seem like she was more in control and he was out of the loop there.
Right.
As for Austin overall, he may have been left out at those two critical points, but he actually showed he was much more involved than many of the jurors thought. Recall that one of Austin's plans was to stay as under the radar as possible when it came to his smarts because he already couldn't hide his brawn. Katurah said in her interviews that she didn't see Austin as being the strategic brains behind the Reba 4. So she was surprised by some of what he had to say in final tribal council. And I suspect the same was true of others. Julie told Mike Bloom he played so under the radar and tried to pretend he's not smart, but he's probably one of the smartest people. And indeed, Austin discussed in interviews how he made a lot of those under the radar moves in the middle of the game when people didn't necessarily see all of what was happening.
Yes. And this is a great example of understanding how people will perceive you. And he knew that people were going to look at him and see what they thought he was, this surfer guy, because that's what he kind of filled that stereotypical mindset of what a surfer guy looks like. So he was going to play up that role, that part, and not let people know that he is as smart as he actually is. Let Drew take the lead on that. But then he would be able to balance things out with Drew and then also with his immunity challenge abilities or just challenge abilities in general. So overall, understanding entirely how he was going to be perceived was a huge part of his game.
Yeah, definitely. Austin was also in a situation very similar to Dee in that he had set himself up so he was protected by the Reba 4 and others. And we even heard in the finale that he also had two number ones. Kelly told Mike Bloom back when she was voted out, I really, truly thought Austin would be targeted early merge for being a huge guy. Austin was way more insulated than I knew. And, Drew said in the Jury Speaks segment, Austin was invincible. Even when things didn't go his way, he walked out unscathed.
Yeah.
Now, he might have been talking about his own vote, out. Now, a big part of that was due to his strategic maneuvering. As he told Mike Bloom, I kind of went up to everyone and made sure they're like, listen, we have a final 3 pact with each other to the end. This is why I want it to be you. And I think I was able to convince a lot of people that they were in my long-term plan. And because of that, if any word came out of my name coming, and I think that really only happened once with Julie, people immediately shut it down.
Yeah, he really did insulate himself incredibly well.
Yeah. Now, Jake, on the other hand, was a very different story in almost every possible way. He desperately wanted to make moves and told us multiple times he was tired of being told what to do. I would say the hallmark of Jake's game was him wanting to be in control and not being able to make it happen.
Yes, Jake really got caught up in this big move-itis. It was, and I understand that he wasn't in the same position. He didn't have a core group with him, which obviously is going to make your gameplay much more difficult.
Right.
We have seen people fight it up from the bottom and really are able to make some moves. In Jake's position, a big move would have been really helpful to him because he didn't have the ability to do all of these other small strategic moves with a group of people. So I think he understood that's what he needed because he didn't have any of the other things the Reba 4 had. It really was just Jake trying to claw his way through and stay relevant and stay in the game, but still struggling because you can't make things happen if you don't have a core group helping you make those things happen. So unfortunately, I think he blew his chances for those big moves that he needed by some of the additional gameplay that he decided to partake in.
Yeah, I mean, because he didn't have control or a view of the big picture, he kept presuming that meant people weren't really playing, which made him even more frustrated. But he hit a key point at the end of a thought he was voicing in episode 10 when he said nobody wanted to do anything or they don't want to do it with him. That last part was the important bit. We've said it many times before. If it looks like nobody is actually playing the game, it almost always means they're just not playing the game with you.
Yeah.
Because they were all definitely playing, but everyone had their own plans while the true core was hidden.
Yeah, and Jake, unfortunately, didn't find himself in a position with that group that made him necessary, which is why he was always the backup vote, why he was always the person that they were like, well, we can vote Jake out, because Jake was almost that wild card. If he's not part of the core group, if he's not even part of one of the little side alliances, even though he had a little bit of a relationship with Drew, it makes his presence a potential issue because they can't control him as much as they want. And also it makes him more desirous of, I need to do something to make myself seen, which is also a problem for this core group of people. So Jake being present was a problem for those particular reasons. And so I can understand why they were constantly like saying, well, we'll just vote out Jake, because Jake wasn't helping them the way that they needed to be helped to get everyone to the end the way that they had planned.
Yeah. And then they didn't vote out Jake for a reason I'll mention later. But,
yes.
But, you mentioned that basically it was like, this forced him into the big moves type of viewpoint. But, and you also said, that, well, because of that made it more difficult. And it did, because it meant he kind of jumped from one idea to another. It's like, oh, I'll make the big move over here. Okay, that didn't work. I'll make it over here.
Yes.
And, Katurah said at one point, Jake's strategy is literally all over the place. And she added to Mike Bloom, we repeatedly came across Jake's desire to make a big flashy move and it being his downfall. I felt that his desire to make a flashy move would also often skew his vision of, but is this the right move? Does this make the most sense? Like going to rocks at Final 12.
I'm just going to say.
It's skewed?
It skewed it.
Yes. Like going to rocks at Final 12 and expecting me to take a 1-in-3 shot of going home. And then immediately right before it, confirming my suspicions that I was on the bottom and excluded, and you guys were never going to work with me and withholding key information in the game. I'm like, why would you do that, Jake?
Yeah. I think that's what everyone was saying this last episode was, why would you do that, Jake?
Yes.
I wanted to throw my phone at one point.
Yes. Now, there's a third problem, which is that Jake would sometimes openly say he was doing something to score points with the jury.
Yeah.
Now, generally speaking, if you're trying to impress someone, you shouldn't say, I'm doing this to impress you.
Yes. It should just impress them.
Right. I feel like we've had this discussion at some point. I don't remember when, but I remember as I was thinking of an example, I'm like, oh, wait, I've given this example before of like taking a woman to a fancy restaurant on a date and bringing her expensive flowers, and each time saying, I'm doing this to make you like me more.
Right.
I mean, it's not going to work. You impress someone just by impressing them, not by saying, I'm impressing you now. Look at me.
Yes. It's like when someone tries to tell you a joke and it's not funny, and then they explain to you why it's a funny joke. It's like, no, that's not how jokes work. It's like it either is or it isn't. And so like if Jake wants to make this move and the jury finds it impressive, they will just find it impressive. If you have to explain it, you're not starting out in a good place at all.
Yes. I'm going to do this and this and this, and then the jury will love me. Jury.
Yes, jury, are you listening? You will be impressed now.
Yeah. So yeah. But yeah. Now I have to give Jake props for at least never giving up. He tried and tried and tried. No matter how many times Lucy pulled that football away, he was going to try to kick the damn thing. The problem is there wasn't just one Lucy. There were like 5 or 6 of them. Some of them working together, some independently. And while they were happy to use Jake as a vote or a decoy, they didn't want to specifically work with him in a way that would help him out. So every time he tried, that football was gone again.
Yeah, sorry, Jake.
Yeah. Now, with that said, I think it would be interesting to see him return into a situation where he wasn't playing out of a hole to see what he could do.
And, that's a fair point, because Jake is clearly, as you've already indicated, a super fan. He understands the game. And there is a certain component to Survivor that when you start out this game, and if you don't have a good footing right off the bat, it's really hard to come back from that. And so he just found himself in a tough spot because he was at the bottom trying to work his way up. And it just makes it for a much more difficult existence. One of the things that we've noted about Reba was, well, they never had to go to tribal council. So that's definitely going to help them get further in the game. That's going to help them bond more and create all of those.
Neither did
Bello.
Bello.
Right. But the difference between, I think, Bello and Reba was the ability for the communication with Reba that we're finding out existed and did exist, whereas Bello was not taking that type of approach. They were very separate. They were not getting along. And all of those things make a difference when you're trying to play this game.
Yeah, Bruce wanted to keep everyone together. He tried. The problem was he tried. Like it wasn't like people coming together naturally, like on Reba. It was Bruce saying, "We will stay together,
and you will not talk to anyone else."
Yes.
Yeah. Problem.
Give me 20 push-ups. Yeah. I don't think he ever did that.
I don't think so either.
No. Now, of course, Jake's fellow Bello was one of his repeated foils, and that was Katurah. It's sad how much hate towards Katurah I've seen online from people who are mad she didn't just go along with Jake's plans, as if she wasn't allowed to have thoughts of her own. Now, you may think you're a Jake super fan, but there are some people out there who are like Jake stands, like nothing Jake did was wrong. Everyone, like I literally had someone tell me on one of my TikToks, Jake only lost because nobody would listen to him and everyone else screwed up.
Oh,
and it's like,
interesting.
Okay, but if no one would, I'm not going to rehash the argument because it just doesn't make sense. It's like, literally they said it's everyone else's fault that Jake didn't win. And it's like, okay. But a lot of that hate has been directed at Katurah because she didn't go along with his final plan.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, she's allowed to play for herself, and we certainly heard more from Jake because he was a fun narrator, but she had her own game. And as she said in an interview, she felt the way she had to play to survive was to keep a low profile, almost to her detriment. And of course, she was talking about what people on the jury thought to her own detriment if she made it to final three, but it also apparently applied to some viewers. But making people not worry about her was her plan. Drew even said in his interviews last week that there was a conversation at this tribal council, which we didn't see, at his tribal council. And Jeff said, Katurah, you think you're making moves. Do you need to present those moves? Do you need to take a little more credit? Because she was so under the radar. And she told Mike Bloom, I wanted you to question my gameplay so much that I got taken to final three. I had like a Marianne, Erica, Gabler energy in mind where people were like, you're definitely not a threat. And then you come up and say, look, I've been in this game the whole time. Now, I don't know if that would have worked, especially depending who she was up against, but at least it was a plan to get to the end. She was enacting her own strategy there.
Yes. And I will say that this is a very difficult strategy to pull off. We have seen individuals in the past, as you just mentioned, pull it off. And like the Erica win that kind of surprised everyone. But I think in this particular setting, it would have been very hard for her just because you do have a group of people who were very cohesive and can speak to the moves that they were making. And I think they could have presented Katurah as like, she was kind of like, on the side. And we used Katurah in order for us to create the end that we wanted. She was there, she was present, but for all of us, Katurah wouldn't have been part of that. And I think she even spoke to how she was left out of so many things right at the beginning. And that she wasn't involved and wasn't included. So again, she's kind of in that Jake situation where she doesn't have a core group. She's being left out of a lot of things. So you have to try to create an existence of how do you still become relevant and how do you matter with this group of people when you are not included in that group of people. And so I think it would have been hard for her to sell, but she was certainly liked enough by people on the jury. And I do think that there were respectable parts of her game that she could speak to. And the reasons why she did certain things she would be able to justify, like flipping her vote at that last moment. But I do think that it would have been hard for her to really sell that to the jury as much as she wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, and, part of it goes back to what you said about her having to, find ways to work her way to the end. And, a lot of viewers saw it and didn't understand it was Katurah apparently going against the interests of the other bellow. But again, it goes back to the way the Reba 4 worked. She noted in interviews that she tried to work with the bellow over and over, but was consistently left out or on the bottom. Mm-hmm. So she did the smart thing. She saw it was time to switch it up. After the Caleb vote, she said she approached Reba, probably Dee and Julie in particular, and wanted to pretend to be with Bello, but actually work with the Reba. Of course, this worked perfectly with Dee and Julie's own plans that we discussed earlier. It would have been interesting to have both Katurah and Dee or Julie in the final three debating, like, we brought you in. No, I came in to you and was using you. Mm-hmm. But the rest of her plan, as she explained in interviews, was she figured the Reba would eventually turn on each other and they'd need a number in that battle. So when they went after Julie, she was there. When they turned on Drew, she was there. She was in a good position until that final 5 vote that we'll talk about more later.
Yeah. I'm not jumping ahead.
Okay. Good job. Yeah.
I see I'm learning.
That's right. That's right.
It's been years.
Yeah. Now, of course, that final 5 vote resulted in Julie being sent to the jury. Before that, most of what we discussed at the beginning of this rule regarding to the Reba 4 applied to her as well. She was tight with that group and was obviously protected as Dee saved her at the final 7 vote and then worked with her to flip the next vote against Drew. She even seemed to have a specific role within the Reba, as she would get close to people as Mama J and then help get rid of them. Several times we saw her pretending to be on the bottom of the alliance so she could get information, but she was playing the game hard, as Drew thought she had more final 3s than anyone, which was one reason he targeted her.
Yes. And I think that she was someone who also understood how she would be perceived and leaned into it. She was a little bit hesitant when she realized she had kind of named herself Mama J and thought that was a bad idea. But then once she did it, she's like, okay, I need to own this 100%. And she did. And it worked. It certainly gave her a character trait that separated her out, but also gave her the ability to connect with people on a different level. And really and create that bond with individuals like Kelly and like Kendra, because she is like the mother. And so she could be perceived as, I would never lie to you, child. I'm looking out for you. I'm taking care of you. And really she's kicking them out the door and they just don't see it coming. So credit to her for owning that, leaning into it, and then allowing it to become her social game that then everybody was afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, now she didn't agree with everything that Drew said in his interviews.
Right.
And, we noted last week it was strange for him to say that they agreed to turn on each other at final 6. She says she never agreed to it. She wanted the Reba 4 to go to the end. And she acknowledged in interviews she was making those other alliances, but she said they all were. And she thought that was the whole plan, to have these side alliances. And, that we've been discussing that here. She told Mike Bloom, I think he must have really thought I meant the other ones, though I always came back and told them what I was doing. I just thought I was playing the game. So it's interesting to have that. And it's something we talk about. It's always a risk when you say, okay, I'm going to say, Jessica, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to talk to that other podcaster. But don't worry, I'm coming back to you. Don't you worry about it. And then I go over to them. And then I come back to you and I say, okay, this is what they had to say. Now, you could either trust me.
Sure.
Or you can think I'm plotting against you and just using it as an excuse. And both things have happened over the course of time.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, it's just interesting that, Drew apparently thought, oh, when Julie's doing it, it's real. But when I'm doing it, it's not.
Yes, and we've seen this on Survivor before. It's like what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Like how come it's all right that you're doing that, but I'm not allowed to? And I just feel like that's just part of who Drew is. I think Drew really did want to be seen as the mastermind and really did want to control so many components of this Reba alliance. And he was, I'm going to say it, I'm not trying to jump, but maybe a little threatened by Julie and her ability to connect with people. And so I think that kind of built inside of him that like, oh no, do I need to worry about her? Because people really seem to like Mama J. And that could be a really big problem for me because he's not creating those types of relationships with as many people as she is.
Right, right. Now, I also want to mention one thing Julie said that counters something else that Drew said and something that I criticized Drew for last week quite a bit. Last week I was sick and I summoned up every ounce of energy to criticize that
The
one
two
thing.
of us were a mess.
Yeah. Now, he had said that the reason the Reba 4 agreed not to go to the end together was it might not be received well by viewers. And we strongly told future players to never, ever, ever worry about that. On the other hand, Julie told Rob, I knew my game of loyalty to the end would be boring to the audience, but I didn't care. Good for you, Julie. That is exactly the appropriate attitude.
It is the appropriate attitude.
Like we said last week, let production worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Let them figure out how to, and they did, I mean, they hid the Tika 3 being tight. They hid the Reba 4 being tight. Not as much, but somewhat. So yeah, let them worry about it.
Right.
You play your game. All right. Well, with that, we could finally move on to the second rule. I think that will be the longest of all our rules. Again,
it's 51 minutes.
I mean, not all of that was in the rule, like probably a half hour.
That's fair. That's fair.
But still, this is why I always say it is the most important rule. There's a reason for that. Okay. So the second rule says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. The final 5 did generally well here, with a few exceptions that ended up not mattering, but could have, other than Jake.
I knew that there was going to be an other than Jake.
Well, yeah. Because to nobody's surprise, Jake did more overplaying than any of the others in the final 5, as he was trying to go for that big move that we talked about in the first rule.
Yeah.
This especially started back at the split tribal council when he wanted to save Caleb by pushing for a tie and believing that Austin would be too scared to go to rocks, while Katurah would be solid enough to play chicken with the idea of doing that. He way overthought that one, and there were several mistakes, some of which we addressed earlier in a quote from Katurah about how they first showed her she was on the bottom and then asked her to risk her game on this cockamamie plan. Plus, it was an odd read by Jake, thinking Austin would be so scared he'd flip. I would love to know what gave him that idea. Like, Austin does not give me fear vibes at any.
Right. Yeah.
Jake was sitting fine, but decided even then he needed to make a move, which put him in a worse position that caused him to constantly think he needed to make a move because his previous ones didn't work.
Right.
As Katurah told Gordon Holmes, he wants to make a flashy move so bad that he forgets the strategic implications of it.
Yeah. And listen, and again, I feel for Jake because he did find himself in this situation where he needed that. He thought he needed something on his resume.
Yeah, but I mean, way back at the beginning, at the split tribal council,
yeah,
he didn't need it like that. He
didn't.
Caleb
but
as an
he
ally
got caught. Yes.
Yeah.
He got caught up in this idea that I have to have something that I can put on my resume. I need this big move. And when this didn't work out, then he wants something else. And when that didn't work, he wants something else. And I know you already discussed this, but kind of being all over the place the way that he was really made him unpredictable because you weren't sure where he was coming from and what his next plan was going to be and how out there was it going to be. And so it's just, I wish that something had happened early on for him that maybe would have made him feel less inclined to have to pull off a big move. But because things just continued to not work, he continued to push and try to make things happen that didn't make any sense and should not have been the avenue that he was trying to go down. But he really was so hung up and caught up in this idea of I need something to point to and say that's mine. and he could have done it. I won't jump ahead.
Now, another issue Jake had here was, well, as Bruce said on the show, Jake doesn't have the ability to keep his mouth shut in the game.
Are we going to talk about it now?
No. Bruce tried to use that to his advantage by telling Jake the idol lie that he knew Jake would spread around.
Right.
And people just generally didn't trust Jake, as again we saw at Final Five when Katurah knew he was lying about something but just couldn't pinpoint what. So yeah, he wasn't very good at hiding those aspects of himself.
And I think that we should just take a moment to mention one of the things that Dee said in her exit press about that silence was her power. And there is a lot to be said that just keeping your mouth shut can be a powerful move at the same time. Jake, you want a big move, just don't tell everyone about whatever it is you're going to do.
All right. Well, another issue in this rule, not for Jake, was, of course, the showmance duo of Dee and Austin, which is expressly warned against in this rule. However, just as the Reba 4 overall did a good job of hiding how close they were with each other, the couple did as well. We discussed earlier how when Kendra started picking up on it, Dee made sure she was next to go. As things progressed, though, it became an open secret. Dee said on the show that by that time, it was too late for everyone else to do anything about it. The thing is, it actually wasn't.
Right.
Because Katurah had a chance to put a stop to it. Indeed, she pointed out that Dee and Austin had, quote, a whole relationship and how terrible it was that they let the pair get so far together. It's one reason she convinced Jake to vote for Dee in the Final Five. And Dee's relationship with Austin was what finally got attention to her, rather than all the other things she'd done. You know, you were just saying one way she avoided it was silence. Well, this was loud. Now, we'll discuss what happened with that vote in a moment. But the point is, this obvious duo could have easily spelled the end of Dee's game.
Yes, which is fascinating because even though the two of them wanted to stick to that competitive nature they each had and were willing to cut each other if they had to, clearly we saw that there was an issue because and I'm going to jump, emotions get in the way, Austin, for some of the parts of this. So yeah, I mean, this was
a few minutes ago. You're like, see, I'm learning. I'm not going to jump ahead.
But I can't help it. They all just come together. But I do think this is a very risky thing for the two to do. And one of the things that Drew actually mentioned was that how do you compete with that? And I'm Austin's other number one. How do I compete with what Dee's got? Because that's not me. And so that is
start holding his hand and hugging him more. That's
right. And going on, special little helicopter rides and watching the sunset together on the beach. Yeah, something, because it's certainly a different level when that's the type of bond you've created with someone as opposed to you're my solid alliance member.
Yeah. Now, another instance of Dee going against the second rule was when she told Katurah exactly why she wanted to get her knocked out at fire making. It was so much fun. This allowed Katurah to tell the jury everything Dee had said about how great she was and what a threat and how much strategizing she'd done, etc. If she had beaten Jake at fire, it gave her a great leg up in terms of making her jury arguments before the final three even began, because she could just say, hey, remember what she said last time, how she wanted to get me out? There's a reason for that. And here I am, Now, again, it didn't end up biting Dee because Jake did beat Katurah in fire making. But the point is, there was no reason to be that honest with Katurah before she was out of the game.
And I can appreciate Dee wanting to make Katurah feel better. But the fact that then Katurah took it and flipped it in the way that she did, hey, you want to hear all of the wonderful things Dee said about me? Why she doesn't want me sitting here? Because you all will think I'm awesome. Yeah, definitely great gameplay by Katurah in that moment. Not great gameplay by Dee thinking that she needed to be so honest.
Yeah. Now, for Austin, obviously he was one half of the showmance that almost got Dee voted out. So he bears half the responsibility there. The thing is, it affected him even less because he was never a target, even with that. They weren't like, oh, there's the showmance, we need to get rid of Austin. It was, oh, there's the showmance, we need to get rid of Dee.
Yeah, why is she the one getting all the heat for that?
Because she was the one that they saw as being more in charge.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
Now, we already mentioned Katurah a couple times, having changed her final 5 vote from Dee to Julie. And my first inclination was, like so many other people, she overschemed. But after hearing the interviews, I better understand where she was coming from in terms of knowing Austin was going to vote Julie, and also knowing that Jake was lying about something. And he was, just not where his actual vote was going, because he swore on Nana.
He did.
And it's hard to say she should have gone with the plan anyway and targeted Dee when she hadn't been able to work with him all game. We knew what was happening. But once again, we have to remember she was in the game. She did not have that information.
Right.
So, again, to anybody who may be listening and may not have gotten that. And I suspect most of the people who argue on social media are not the type who are listening to this podcast, because we know that only smart people listen to this podcast. So,
but the thing that I find, and I appreciate that, the thing that I find interesting, though, about this breakdown is, so she knows Austin is voting for Julie. She's concerned that she might be the one being voted for. If everyone else is voting for her, then it doesn't matter if she throws a vote on Julie, because that would be 3 on her and then 2 on Julie. So and that's the part that kind of throws me off a little bit.
Wait, say that again.
So if she knows Austin is voting for Julie, that's 1 vote for Julie.
Mm-hmm.
And then if she thinks everyone else is voting for her, and that Jake is going to play his idol just because but who's going to vote for Jake at that point? Because he's already told everyone he has an idol.
Yeah, but she doesn't know that he told, does she?
She knows he told everybody that that Jake was going to play his idol. She knew that Jake was going to play his idol. So Jake, and then
that's right. That's why it was self-preservation. So she worried that, yeah.
So even because you had Julie saying, well, I'm going to vote for Jake anyway. So that's 2 votes so you got to vote for Jake. You've got to vote for Julie. And then you still have 3 other people. If 2 people vote for Katurah and then she votes for Dee, then I could see why voting for Julie would make sense to flip, because then at least you have a tie. It's 2 and 2.
Well, yeah, that's what it was. It was because she knew that Austin was voting for Julie.
Right.
So only potentially Julie and Dee would be voting for her. So that would be
Julie was voting for Jake.
But she didn't know that. I'm saying.
Oh, no, she was trying to convince the girls to vote for Jake. She was I'm voting for Jake.
No. Katurah didn't know that.
I thought Katurah knew that too.
I don't think
because
so.
She was trying, because Julie was trying to convince.
Then it makes even more sense to ensure she, puts a second
right. So
vote
this
on
is why,
Julie.
I'm trying to work it all through in my brain to make it make sense, because it's like, if people are struggling, as I was struggling, I'm still struggling to work through the numbers. But it also depends on what Katurah did know, and I think that she knew that Julie was voting for Jake, and she knew that Austin was voting for Julie. And then if Jake plays his idol, then that vote that Julie's, if it's a real idol, then that doesn't matter. And then you've got who's left. You have Dee is left to vote, and then you've got Jake that's left to vote.
Right.
And if Jake is not going to be voting for, but that's the part that I don't know why she would have thought that suddenly he would have been switching his vote to Katurah. I guess maybe she thought that's what it was.
I mean, she didn't know who he was voting for. She just knew he was lying. She could tell he was lying about something. And considering the amount of time she spent trying to convince him to vote for Dee, that's the most logical thing that he would have been lying about.
Right. Yeah.
So, that way but yeah, that wasn't what he was lying about.
No,
but
Jake. We'll talk about that too.
Yeah. All right. For now, we'll move to the third rule, which tells players to be flexible. We had a lot of discussion in the first rule regarding how the Reba 4 had multiple outside alliances to control the game. But I feel for most of them, that was more planned strategy than it was alternate options.
Yes. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that they were putting themselves in a better position, but they were pretty lock solid in Reba 4.
Yeah. Now, I do think Drew and Austin had a definite option of moving forward with Emily if they chose to or were forced to go that route. So that was good. I suppose the same thing could be said about some of the other side alliances. You know, if something happened and Reba blew up, they had those backups. Austin even told Mike Bloom, once Bruce was gone, I had a final 3 with everybody left in the game, essentially. And I feel like I was talking strategy with everybody in the game and had a decent relationship with pretty much everyone, too. And yeah, indeed, it seemed even if Katurah had voted out Dee, her plan was still to go to the end with Austin. So once he got to a certain point, he was pretty much a lock to make it to the end.
Yeah.
Jake, of course, was ultimately flexible. He would work with anyone who would have him.
Yes, he would.
The problem, as we discussed, was that nobody would have him. People just kept using him and lying to him.
Yeah. Sorry, Jake.
Yeah. Now, I think Katurah was somewhere in the middle in terms of her flexibility. She would have gone to the end with any of them, but we saw her working with certain people just didn't work well for her.
Yeah, and I think she was in a very similar position as we've already mentioned, that she didn't really have a core group, and Bello kind of kept her on the outs. And so that, again, makes it very difficult for you to have as many options as you want. But she did seem to be willing to consider various options. And I mean, I think flipping your vote at tribal council or changing your vote shows that you've got some ability to switch things up and not be totally locked in committed, but that's also part of a strategic thing and you're trying to work through the numbers. So I think that she was in a similar position as Jake, but for much different reasons.
Yeah. All right, well, we can quickly move to the fourth rule here, which tells players not to let their emotions control them. And I do have to say, now you already suggested, problems here, but I think Dee gave us a masterclass in this.
Yes. Dee was great. Austin was not.
Okay. Yes. She was obviously in a showmance with Austin and even mentioned she was thinking about him when he'd been swapped away, but she didn't let it interfere with her game, and that's the key. Austin asked her not to tell Julie about the blind side, but she determined it was better for her game, so she did. On the flip side, she knew Austin would tell Drew about the blind side, so she specifically kept him out of the loop. As Dee told Mike Bloom, we'd flirt, we'd hug, but our heads were in the game. She also told him in the final 4 tribal, they cut it out, but I told Austin, if you need to bleep on my mother, bleep on my mother. I am coming for you. My fire's coming out. So I think I did just that. And yeah, they both definitely went back and forth in the final tribal council to fight for the win. They didn't get all lovey-dovey and schmoopy. They went after each other.
Did you say schmoopy?
Yes, I did.
What is schmoopy?
You don't know what schmoopy is? Like,
I know. What is schmoopy?
Like all lovey-dovey and...
This is a real word, schmoopy?
Yeah.
All right. Hashtag schmoopy, everyone.
There you go. Don't ask me to spell it.
I'm curious. I'm going to look this up.
Now, as you just indicated, Austin wasn't quite as able to separate things in the same way Dee was. He, of course, told her about the Julie blind side. And yes, he had his backup plan that Julie would almost certainly vote out Emily if she found out. So he wasn't that worried about it. But it still felt like he told her for more than just strategic reasons. As Katurah said, if this doesn't work, I blame Austin and his stupid emotional heart.
Yes. And I think that it's one of those moments where just watching him struggle to tell her, it was a much different presentation than when we watched Emily telling Caleb that he was, getting votes and that this is about, saving your ass. That was very matter of fact, this is what's happening. Whereas Austin was like, I need to tell you something. It was just, it came from a different place. It did not come from a strategic place. It came from I really like you and I want you to know what's going on. So I'm going to tell you, but don't tell her I'm telling you.
It came from his stupid emotional heart. as
Yes, it
Katurah said.
did.
Yes.
Because he's schmooping.
Schmooping.
Schmooping. I need to remember this. Schmoopy.
Yes. But I mean, I would say mostly he knew and understood the separation. He had said in Tribal
Yes, I think
Council,
so.
we're all huge fans of the game. You're playing a part in ending someone's dream. We've been walking this line between playing really hard and ruthless, but also connecting as a family.
Right.
And, I think he also did a good job in handling the discussion after Drew was voted out. As I saw him talking to Dee, I knew that even if he really was upset, he was saying exactly what he needed to.
Yeah.
And, he told Mike Bloom afterwards, when you get blindsided, the worst thing you can do is go back and get pissed off at everyone. If you're not willing to work with other people, then they'll vote you. I wanted to make sure that I didn't burn the bridge with Julie and Dee. So I went back to both of them and was like, listen, I understand as a game move. I'm back with Reba. Reba 3, let's go.
Yeah. And he did also, and I've mentioned this previously, had a plan in place that if he had won the final 4, he was going to go up against Dee in firemaking to take her out. So that certainly was not coming from an emotional place, but coming from a complete game move.
Yes. Now, there were other conversations at a couple tribal councils about separating emotion from gameplay, and pretty much all of them were on the same page about it being necessary. Jake did say it gets harder, but that didn't seem to stop him. While Katurah said some people could acknowledge being close, but remove emotion. Julie was handling the opposite side of emotion, though, as she talked about several times in her interview with Gordon Holmes and elsewhere. For example, she wanted to go after Jake for emotional reasons after he tried to vote her out in the split tribal council, but she knew it didn't make strategic sense. And in the vote where people attempted to blindside her, she wanted to go after Austin, but again, knew it didn't make strategic sense to do so. However, when she did decide to go after someone, emotional bonds didn't matter. When Gordon Holmes had Drew doing word association and mentioned Julie, Drew said assassin, cold-blooded.
Love that for her.
Yes. Well, I mean, she's a lawyer, so of course she's a cold-blooded assassin. It's pretty much the same thing.
Oh my word. That's aggressive. I wouldn't call myself a cold-blooded assassin.
Oh, was I too easy on you? I'm sorry.
Oh my goodness. You are, look at you, you little giggle. You're so proud of yourself. Oh my goodness.
I mean, that's why they're afraid of it. That's why nobody wants to say they're a lawyer, including you.
I understand entirely why people don't want to say that they're lawyers, because we do come with perceptions like we're cold-blooded assassins.
Exactly. See, I'm just trying to help feed that.
Understood.
So, waiting for the whole season of attorneys where none of them know they're attorneys.
That's a great idea.
I'm not the only one who had it, but yes, it's
that's fantastic. I think that we need to do this. Yes.
All right. Well, we could go to the 5th rule, which reminds players they need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. And once again, we have a situation where everyone in the final 5 did well, with some going above and beyond. Dee, of course, did an amazing job, and she had great relationships with all of the players to the point that nobody wanted to get rid of her. As Kelly said in a Jury Speaks segment, Dee had the social relationships where people were unwilling to vote her out, even though it was the correct move. Now, we sometimes talk about how it's one thing to be well-liked, but it doesn't matter if you don't convert that into a social game using social capital.
Yes.
But Dee definitely had the connection. It was, part of the overlap of the heart and head that she talked about in Final Tribal Council, where social bonds turned into game.
Yes.
And, it's hard to show that on TV specifically, but other players described it. Kendra told Mike Bloom that Dee just oozed charisma and everyone liked talking to her. She made you feel like she was talking specifically to you, looking people in the eye, having a really fun way about her that makes you feel connected. Drew told Gordon Holmes, when you talked to Dee, you didn't feel like you were being subordinated. You felt like you were primary to her. Maybe that's his way of saying she had multiple number ones. And then he continued, she had a lot of emotion and honesty that we didn't see.
Yeah. And I really do feel like this whole group was very interested in creating good relationships. A lot of them in their exit press said that they really wanted to love their cast members and they wanted to get along, and that this group, they all felt very like this must be an impressive person because they understood what it took to get on the show to begin with. So I really feel like they were all willing to look beyond the game just to also create those social bonds. But then you do have people who were then taking that to the next level. And Dee definitely took that to the next level. She understood the significance of not only am I creating this relationship, I'm going to use it strategically. And the fact that she was so insulated, and the two number ones, which we've already talked about, nobody wanted to vote her out. She had options of who wanted to take her to the final three. She really was in a great position because she had filled the jury with people that liked her, but then also she had people who were willing to sit next to her who also liked her so much they didn't want to vote her out. So perfect position for her to be in as far as a final three and tribal council survivor, like basically ever.
Yeah. So what did you think about Austin in this rule for his social game?
I think Austin was also someone who was very well liked, and I think that came from the fact that he didn't approach, and this is gonna, I don't want this to sound mean towards anyone, but that he didn't approach the game in the way Drew did. He let Drew kind of get the blood on his hands, right? Because he didn't present himself as that super smart, strategic person. He was more of the likable half of that duo. And so I feel like he understood how he was going to be perceived and went with that. I'm just this likable individual who wants to work with you. I'm going to work hard. And so I do think that he was able to formulate the bonds that he needed and that he was able to create relationships. And he was also still playing a really hardcore game at the same time. So I think overall, he certainly did very well with this in creating the bonds that were necessary and developing them right off the bat. I mean, the relationship that he developed with Drew right away was based upon not just strategic gameplay, but also their compatibility, which certainly carried them through the game.
Yeah. Yeah. So then how about your guy, Jake?
Oh my goodness, Jake. Jake is like, I don't know, he's like an enigma, right? Like, I think he was very well liked, but I think also Jake he was scary to people in a different type of way when, playing the game with him, just because
he was a
you
lawyer.
didn't
See, he was scary.
he was scary. It's like no one really knew what Jake was going to end up doing. And so I think overall, like, people really appreciated Jake because of who he was and how he was. He was certainly very likable, but he was also a little bit sketchy. And so because he was a little bit sketchy, it made people question a little bit, like, I don't know about Jake because he's a little sketchy. So it was like this weird combination where, like, he's got a great personality, but then he didn't understand, like Dee did, that when you create this relationship with someone, there's give and take, and you have to be able to make them feel as if you said, Drew, like, that's, I'm their number one in this moment. And Jake never had the ability to do that because he was a little too sketchy with the way that he presented himself, I think, to other people on the island. And also, I'm just going to say this, and this is going to sound terrible, but he let everybody know he's a lawyer. And I think by telling everybody he was a lawyer, they're immediately like, I don't know if I should trust that guy, regardless of how nice he is. Because we all know that we're like hardcore assassins or whatever you said.
Cold-blooded assassins.
Cold-blooded assassins. So maybe it didn't work out so well for him by sharing with everyone that he was a lawyer.
Yeah, I feel that Jake was exactly the type of person I mentioned a few minutes ago, someone who had great relationships, but couldn't turn it into social capital, the social game. Nobody disliked him.
Right. But there was something there that they were like, I mean, I like him, but I don't want to necessarily play the game with him.
Right.
Because there's that sketch factor.
Yes. Moving to Katurah, it's interesting to me because for much of the game, we just, saw her on the outs, in part due to the battle with Bruce. Once she revealed her backstory and everything she went through, I had surmised here that one reason she and Bruce didn't get along related to that. And indeed, she told Dalton Russ, Bruce's communication style really took me back to a low period in life. It took me back to being in an environment where blind obedience is required. And it very much had that energy for both game things and non-game things. So I remember feeling Why am I being boxed in? Why am I not allowed to speak? Why am I not allowed to express myself? Why can't I say, let's discuss this vote together? Let's think it through. Why am I not allowed to add an extra scoop of salt water to the crab boil if I want to? Things
So
like that.
random.
Yes, things like that where it just really was very emotionally triggering. So, yeah, it's understandable that her social game took a hit at that point from,
Yeah.
Being in that mindset.
Yeah, for sure. But it's also interesting to note that really people were very concerned with her sitting in the final three also because of her ability to communicate and her
Mm-hmm.
ability to talk to people. And so I think she was definitely connecting. She clearly had, I say clearly, we've learned that she was very close with Dee and
Mm-hmm.
Julie. And so, we saw that one really cute scene where she and Dee were jumping up and down when they were both deciding that Drew was going to be the vote.
Yes.
And that must mean you have a close relationship with this person and that you have a social bond with this person. So I think she really did have the ability to create those relationships, but yes, found herself in a very similar situation where there was this bellow issue at the beginning that limited her ability to really connect on the level that she needed to make that a strategic game move.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, once Bruce was gone, she was more free to be herself, and we saw more in terms of her personality. Um, and in game terms, Austin noted that Katurah was good at telling people what they needed to hear, so you keep talking to her, which is
Mm,
definitely important. And one of the things Dee mentioned in explaining why she wanted Katurah out was that she was loving and sweet,
yeah,
great in real life, dangerous in Survivor if not handled well.
absolutely.
Now, as we get to Julie, we have the one person who might have done an even better job here than Dee.
Mm-hmm.
Her whole Mama J strategy, once it kind of accidentally came out, was to use that persona to gain trust, lie to people, and betray them after they got so connected to her that they would believe her.
Yeah.
It started taking a toll on her after Kelly and Kendra, but then she got past it and kept it going.
Which I
Uh,
thought was so funny. She was like, then
yeah,
I was fine with it.
well, cold-blooded assassin.
That's
Um,
right.
as Lee said on the show, Julie could relate to every person on the tribe. And she further told Rob that everybody on that jury loved Julie.
Mm.
Drew added in his interview with Mike last week, she's gotten great social relationships with the jury. Julie truly was the mama of the group. And if she had made it to the end, I think she would have been rewarded rather than punished, like so many other older women in similar spots have been historically.
Yeah, and I think it's because she's just so well-rounded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like she had that social component to her game. She made people feel significant, but they also could respect the move when she was making it and understood or would have understood why she did it. And so I just feel like her entire presentation was just so well-rounded that she didn't present it in a way that would make anyone feel an ill sense towards her for the decision that she made, that it would have been a respected move instead. So it would have been great to see her in a final three to really, I don't know, hear her talk to the people that she had voted out and hear what their reaction
Right.
would be to them sitting there and her sitting in the final three.
Yeah, and that takes us nicely to the sixth rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. And we'll continue with Julie because, like you said, it would have been interesting to see her in the final three. And I just said she could have won if she made it there,
Mm-hmm.
which, of course, is a damn good reason to ensure she doesn't make it to the end.
Right.
Uh, this was a major factor in Drew initiating the blind side at Final Seven with Austin and
Mm-hmm.
Jake on board as well. And Jake added that he worried about her in Final Four fire making too. So if they had let her get far enough, she might have been unstoppable. Of
Yeah.
course, the way she went out was a little ridiculous with this in mind, but it worked for them.
Yes. No, it definitely did. But I do think that even Jeff Probst said she would have won if she was sitting in the final three. So
I
and
mean,
I
I
know
don't know
that
that I don't know that I trust what Jeff says about Jeff's
listen, I'm just
but
saying the
I know.
listener should
I
know
know.
that that was
Yes.
what Jeff's
Yes.
perception was. I do think that Dee, separating her from Dee, I know that Dee had some plans as to how she was going to do that
Mm-hmm.
and have the ability to separate from the two. So I think between Dee and Julie, that would have been a really That would have been a very interesting final tribal council.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, if there was one person who was a bigger threat than Julie in the game, it was Dee. Jake said, back in episode 7, adding to Katurah that he thought she was wicked powerful. It seemed like opinions of threat levels kind of ebbed and flowed over the next few episodes, with Jake then deciding Julie was a bigger threat while Katurah pushed for Dee, to the point that, again, we get to the situation of her finally convincing him to vote Dee with that whole final 5 fiasco. As I mentioned earlier, Katurah said the fact that she had to work so hard to convince Jake said something, as did the fact that neither of the other two would vote for Dee. She did enough to hide her own threat level, even with her closest allies.
Yeah.
Now, Austin also worked hard on hiding what a threat he was, as he told Mike Bloom. One of my biggest strategies going into the game and focus point in my strategy was threat management. I knew just being a bigger athletic guy, I would immediately have eyes targeting me. So the moves I made had to kind of be under the radar. I had to sort of have relations with everybody and make them think that they needed me in their game. And he added to Rob that he had to do this because he knows people like him often get cut right around the merge. And that was why he played up the narrative that Drew was the brains, because he couldn't hide his brawn, so he didn't want to be seen as a double threat.
Right. And again, this goes back to that balancing act that I think, or the just the balance that they could all bring to each other. Because I do think when you look at the Reba 4, they're such a different set of individuals that the fact that they were able to come together and each hone their skills, that made it better for the Reba 4, because they each had a particular role to play. And so that, I do think, helped bring down their threat level a little bit in the eyes of other people, because they weren't doing everything. He was letting Drew be the brains. He'll be the brawn. We're going to balance each other out. And so I think that each person in that Reba 4 was able to look at what they were bringing to the table and managing it in such a way that it's like, this is how we're going to be cohesive. This is how we're going to bring us to the end, but we're going to manage each other's threat level by doing so.
Yeah. Now, moving to Jake, he never really had to work to reduce his threat level because, unfortunately for him, the plans that didn't work out reduced his threat level for him. Once he became essentially the Charlie Brown of the season, nobody was worried about taking him to the end. He tried to make the case that he had, been on the bottom, but he stuck around. But a lot of that was just because there were bigger fish to fry. I mean, remember how surprised he was when Kelly was voted out instead of him.
Yeah.
Whoa. I mean, whoa. you know, so yeah, it's hard to make the case like, well, I purposely hung around, when it was, you just weren't enough of a threat to worry about.
Right. I mean, and the thing is Jake's threat level could have come from that underdog story if things had changed or worked out a little bit differently in this final episode. I think there would have been something that he could speak to say, hey, listen, I was on the bottom, but then look what I did. I did this and I did that and I did that. That's something. But yeah, we don't have that.
No.
That's an alternate universe that I live in my brain.
As for Katurah, we talked in the second rule about how Dee said flat out it scared her to face Katurah at the end. When Katurah brought that up in the final 4 tribal council, she noted that her game had been to hide her strengths, and she kept her moves hidden so she wouldn't end up on the jury. But she didn't quite keep them hidden enough, as she acknowledged Dee knew some of them. And that was all it took to make her dangerous to Dee.
Yeah. And again, I think that this is an interesting part of Survivor, is that we only see so much, right? Because of the edit. And hearing Dee say these things to Katurah, as a viewer, you go, oh, okay. There's some more things happening here that we're just unaware of, because even Dee is afraid of sitting next to Katurah. And I had been looking at this final group thinking, I don't think Katurah is going to be much of a concern for anyone, because she doesn't have this, resume, and there's not these things that she can point to.
Right.
But clearly Dee saw things that Katurah was doing, which means other people probably would have seen the same thing. And Katurah said she had her bullet points all planned out with what she was going to say. So I think that if she had gotten there, she would have been able to tell a story that is, again, a very difficult story to convince a jury as to why you should win. But she would have had the ability to do so. And she could have pointed her finger back at Dee and saying, look, and even Dee didn't want to sit next to me. And we all know everything about Dee.
Right. All right, well, we can move to the 7th rule, which covers idols and advantages and game mechanics. And starting with idols, Austin, of course, had 2. Julie had the one she permanently borrowed from Austin, and Jake had the one he found at the end.
He gave it to her.
Yeah, he loaned it to her. Now, the one Austin kept never came into play, but he noted at Final Tribal Council that while it's really cool to make a flashy move with an idol, it's equally as cool to not even need to use it. I would 100% agree with that, but he said equally, and I would say it's even cooler to not even need to use it. Dee said something similar there, noting that although she didn't find anything, knowing all the information is at least as important. And yes, I completely agree. Now, of course, Jake would not agree with that statement because he wanted that big flashy move. As we were watching, I think, yes.
Just can't.
Yes. I think everyone was yelling at their TVs when Jake told Austin and then Katurah about having the idol.
Oh, God.
Now,
Jake.
I want to defend him a little bit here. There was actually, there was actually a method to his madness. It was a crazy method.
Okay. Thank you for acknowledging it was a crazy method.
Yes.
And then I'm going to go off on a tangent.
Okay. He said he told Austin on purpose, knowing full well he'd run back and tell Dee and possibly Julie too, which given this season, literally every time someone said it's a secret, don't tell this person, boom, immediate edit cut to them telling them. And so he figured, knowing that he had an idol, they would vote for Katurah instead. Then he and Katurah would put their 2 votes on the same person, and he would same Katurah. Boom! Big move for Jake. But there were several problems. First, telling 2 different people about his idol sent things scattering in an uncontrollable direction. I mean, you can presume how things are going to happen, but they're not always going to happen that way. Like, I'm sure he didn't expect Julie to find out and say, nah, I don't believe it. I'm going to vote for him anyway.
Right.
You know, he thought he had it predicted. It's hard to figure out what one person will do, let alone 2 plus the other 2 that they told.
Right.
Now, second, because he wanted Katurah to be genuinely surprised, he didn't tell her what he was planning to do with the idol. So, as we've already discussed, she could tell he was lying, and that's a big reason that she flipped her vote. So, his planned big move turned into a big fizzle.
It did, unfortunately. And I will just say this as well. Jake could have had a big move by not telling anyone about the damn idol.
He could have, but then, I mean, and that's what I even thought that might happen. Well, that it would happen. Both of us in our predictions were that, Jake wouldn't tell anyone about the idol. They would vote for him. He would use it and he would vote someone out. Now, I had not predicted, I had predicted he would misfire and go after Julie instead of Dee. But because at that point I was predicting Dee as the winner. But yeah, I sort of understand what he's saying here.
I sort of understand it.
Saving yourself is not a big move.
Right. But he could have kind of read the room a little bit too. If he's at a point in the game where he thinks, I'm not a threat, they're not going to vote me out, but I have an idol and I can control what happens with this, you can still control it without having to tell everyone how you're going to do so, because someone's going to have to come to Jake and go, well, Jake, this is what the vote is, right?
Well, they were obviously going to tell him Katurah, whether it was or not.
But they'll say Katurah. But if we're down to this 5, and if Jake is processing through and saying, okay, well, they're probably not going to come for me just because why? And if all of a sudden Katurah is someone that they're focusing on, then let them focus on Katurah. And I know it sounds crazy, but maybe take a chance and be like, I'm just going to play this on Katurah and hope that I'm right. And then whoever you have voted for, then that person, I mean, Katurah needs to kind of be brought into the fold though, because she's going to be voting for someone too. And you want there to be a majority. So I think, this idea that we're going to tell Austin and we're going to tell Katurah really put him in a terrible position, because I think he could have gotten there without having to tell everyone the plan. But this does come down to numbers. You only have 5 people left. And so what did we see? We saw 2-1-1-1 vote, which is terrible. And so, the fact that like you want to play an idol on someone and you want it to be played correctly, if everyone is kind of scattered and doing their own thing, then that idol play becomes less likely to have any effect because everyone is voting for somebody different, which again is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Rob said on one of the podcasts, I don't remember which one, that, he could have done something where he did tell Katurah what was happening.
Yes.
And then when he gets up to play the idol, he pulls a Natalie Anderson and says, "Did you vote the way that I told you to vote?"
Right.
And then plays the idol the appropriate way, and so then he does still get that pop in front of the jury.
Right.
But he wanted a bigger pop.
Goodness.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Now, moving to Julie's idol, that story is an amusing one because after borrowing it, she just kept it. And
she didn't borrow it. She was given the idol. It was a community idol. Everyone was allowed it.
I mean, that was it. She and Dee had been integral to finding it, and the guys had always proclaimed it was all of them. So why shouldn't she keep it? I mean, I've gone back and forth as to whether that helped cause Drew to flip on her at Final 7. Some people have said yes, while it seemed like Drew had very good reasons in his mind to do it anyway. I would say maybe it prompted them to do it a vote sooner in case she used the idol and it took 2 attempts to get rid of her. But it's not like that's the reason they turned on her to begin with.
Yeah, but I do recall there being some conversation that was had between Julie and Austin, which I read in someone's exit press, but like, and maybe Drew must have been involved too, but that she was like, "Oh, my idol." Like she referred to it as her
Drew
idol.
asked her about that. It was Drew saying, so something like, "Do you still have Austin's idol or our idol?" And she went, "You mean my idol?"
Yes.
Yes.
So I think that certainly didn't help. If you want to put forth this belief that it's everyone's idol, and then when you were asked about it specifically and you go, "Oh, you mean my idol?"
Yeah.
That's definitely going to change the view at that point as to what your intentions are with that idol, that it's not a group idol anymore. It's Julie's idol.
Yes.
So I do think that it likely caused her demise sooner than it should have come because the way that she presented it. Yes. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, besides idols, this rule also, as I mentioned, covers game mechanics like Final Four fire making. Now, some very intelligent person tweeted during this episode, "Can we all get over this damn fire making already? It should not hold this much weight."
Who's the genius that put that into the universe?
I don't know, but she should. You know what? She should probably become a lawyer.
That's a great idea.
And
I've
get on
heard
a
they're all
podcast.
assassins.
Yes, yes. Fire assassin is what we need. Yeah, and Katurah herself had said earlier that she wished they just had a normal vote at Final Four.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this season, I think fire making may have had the least impact in a while.
I don't disagree.
Yeah, I of course cringed at Jake wanting to make fire because he wanted a big move. But it seemed as it went on that was more for himself personally, and he knew he had no chance at that point.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
but I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I think that the issue that I saw in this episode, though, is that instead of the focal point being what's going to happen at the Final Four, the focal point turns into, well, who's good at making fire and who's not good at making fire. And it's just obnoxious that like that shouldn't know that it should be social capital, gameplay, like relationship building, all that, all those moments, all that time and effort that you spent trying to get to the end, then can just be like, because now all of a sudden you have this Katurah concern, right? That well, like she might end up sitting there through no fault of us, but because she's better at making a fire. I just, to me, it's, and I love that Dee was like, no, I have enough things that I have done. Fire doesn't matter. I don't need to put myself in that position. So thank you, Dee, for understanding that you can play this game well enough that you don't need to then go make a fire to
not
get
just
respect from the jury.
Should
Yes.
play, she wasn't going to fall into that trap. And, I mean, so now if there wasn't fire making in this case, some people, including I think Rob on one of the podcasts, have said that all three probably would have just voted Katurah out anyway. But I wonder about that because Jake still wanted his big move. So would Jake have joined Katurah to vote Austin and then force fire making between Jake and Austin if the other two voted Katurah? Like, considering how confident Austin seemed to be about his own fire making skills, it could have meant that the attempted big move would have meant Jake going out of the game.
Oh, yes. I think Jake would have completely put himself into fire making.
Yeah.
Because I think that he would have believed that's what he needed for sure.
Right. And then, so we would have ended up with Katurah in the final three instead. And I mean, either way, if this scenario had played out this way, and that would have led to an interesting change, but none of that matters.
It's a different universe as well.
All right. Well, Appendix A is about the players keeping their end goals in mind when voting. And we talk about voting out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. At this point in the game, it's, of course, definitely about getting out the strong threats before the very end. Or should I say most of the strong threats? Because Dee wasn't worried about going to the end with anyone. Again, in a conversation with Survivor 43 James, he told me Dee had the mentality of, I can beat anyone at the end, and played that way. You don't have to cut your allies. The jury respects fighting for your true allies. I loved her game. Even taking Austin showed pure confidence. And this is a frequent thing with James, that he believes all the threats should stick together to the end. And someday we'll actually get him on here scheduling wise to have that conversation. But, it's true. She believed she could beat anyone at the end. Now, she still made it easier for herself by getting rid of Katurah. So it's not like she was one of those people who says, I want to go to the end with the strongest because to be the best, you have to beat the best. She was still smart about it.
Yeah.
But she also wasn't afraid of it.
Right. The only concern that this approach brings to mind is the divvying up the credit and then who's going to get the vote for whatever it is they did. And this is something that we've talked about and we've seen in other seasons where the idea is either you want to bring three people who are so similar that it makes it more, difficult to really point to one individual and go, okay, well, you're separate from those two, so we're just going to give you the votes. But when you have a pair and then you have the outlier, that's where it can become a little bit of a question, because how much of that group is going to be split between Dee and Austin? Who's going to believe that Dee did more than Austin?
Right.
Which is then how Jake could have sneaked in with some votes, because that's what you're then fighting against, is that division of potential votes.
Yeah. And, the thing is, we have talked about that many times. It might even be in the rules somewhere. But during this episode, during this finale, it occurred to me, I don't know that we've ever seen it. I don't know that we've ever seen it play out where it's like, okay, I'm going to vote here, you're going to vote here, and then suddenly this third person rises up. It's theoretically possible. But
it is theoretically possible. And it was actually a discussion that I learned with season 40 where Michelle ended up not getting any votes because
that's the example I was just going to use. Yes.
Yeah. because they were concerned, like, if we start putting votes on Michelle, then how is everything else going to be divvied up? And we might end up with the, with the winner that shouldn't necessarily be the winner just because we want to give Michelle some votes. And so that's where that, those calculations come in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that, like I said, that was exactly the example I was going to use. So yeah, I think that the jury does think about those things sometimes, and you wonder, well, why didn't this person get any votes? Well, that might be why.
Yeah, because all it takes is one or two people to then throw off this split that could be happening amongst these two.
Right.
Because all of a sudden you're like, well, I really want to vote for this person, which I think is one of the reasons why you end up seeing so many more like leaning towards one person when you have like this division of three people. And this is why I don't like this three being, it's a final three instead of a final two, because that one person could potentially throw off a vote just because someone's like, well, I'm going to give them my vote as opposed to these two because it's really between those two, but I'm just going to vote for them. And that's all it could take is that one vote.
Well, that's why you just have to make sure no matter who else you bring, you have to bring one person who's going to get 0 votes.
Yeah.
So ideally you bring 2 people who are going to get 0 votes, but
Right.
Right. Yeah. Now, Austin was also happy to go to the end with Dee, but much like Dee didn't want to go to the end with Katurah, Austin didn't want to go to the end with Julie. It was another strong endgame threat that had to go. So it wasn't quite all of the big threats going to the end together. They clipped off those who could be the most problematic other than each other, of course.
Right.
So, all right. Well, Appendix B is the jury phase and, of course, deals with the final tribal council. And a lot of this went, about the way I expected, with some surprises along the way. First, I thought Dee started a little slow by saying she had a lot of luck when I just wanted her to take credit where credit was due.
Yeah.
It took a little jump starting, like Austin claiming certain things, but she did get there. And once they started, it was a good back and forth with each trying to one up the other. Austin was like, well, I brought in Emily, and Dee's like, well, I brought in Katurah. And, he's like, well, I got Kendra out. And Dee's like, oh, no, you didn't. And so, yeah, it was, that kind of back and forth that was fun to watch.
It was. And then I felt a little bad for Jake because all of this was happening between the other two. And then Jake was kind of just waiting. And I do appreciate his sense of humor because he did say, as he was sitting there, he was like, who would I vote for? Between those two. So yeah, again, the 3-person format for the final. We don't need it. Just go to 2. I would much rather see 2 people battling it out because so often that third person is just kind of left. And I felt that for Jake. I know Jake tried to make the arguments that he could, but even he knew that he was drawing dead. So I think that makes it very hard for anyone to sit there and be like, vote for me when you don't really think anyone should vote for you anyway.
Yeah, the problem is that Jeff would say, well, if we make it final 2, you're going to have one player who can get votes and one player who is like you just mentioned. And so therefore it's not even interesting. You're not even having 2 people battling.
But I don't know. I mean, I can remember so many incredible, honestly, and I'm going way back, old school Survivor, but like that decision of who you're going to sit next was always a big deal because you would have those 2 people. You're like, okay, do I take this person or do I take this person? And you go through all the reasons why you should or shouldn't take these people. And then you make a choice and then that person beats you.
Yes.
It's like, that's the kind of stuff that you're like, oh, that's just like a shot through the heart.
Yeah. Not to be confused with a shot in the dark. Maybe Jeff will come up with that new one. See, look at this. The assassin over here talking about shot through the heart.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Now, eventually, Dee dropped the bomb on Austin about telling Julie. Now, when I say eventually, I'm talking about according to what we saw. As both Austin and Dee said, that actually happened much earlier in tribal council than was shown. I think it actually helped Austin to have it sooner, because he could spend some additional time arguing other things. And it wasn't like mic drop, immediately go to vote. It gave the jury some time to process. Now, did it end up mattering? No, but at least, it was a little bit better for him that way.
Yeah.
Um, Now, along the way, a few things of note also happened. One, Dee just out of nowhere shot out of the darkness, made fun of Bruce for not playing his idol,
I
which
know.
is not an ideal thing to say.
No.
As she told Mike Bloom, I played with fire. I shouldn't have done that. Whatever, lesson learned. That could have been
But
an
then,
expensive lesson.
right, because Bruce voted for Austin.
Yeah. So I don't know if that was the reason. We have no idea what Bruce was thinking because other than that, it was like Bruce was not in that final tribal.
I know. That was so weird.
Yeah, people are asking me like, why wasn't he there? I'm like, he was
Yeah,
edited out. He
strange.
didn't ask questions that the editors found pertinent enough, I guess.
I don't like it.
So now Dee also said something important, noting that focusing on moves can be a downfall, and then referenced people wanting to pull these big moves. And she didn't care about that. She wanted the game to play out, and she made relationships. So yes, Dee, again,
Yeah.
very good. No big moves, just the little moves, like we always say.
Yeah. Because then you have so many more things. If you are controlling the game from the start and how the votes are going and how people are responding and what people are doing, that's what's going to matter more, because that's what you can argue that this wasn't luck that got me to this point. It was my social capital. It was the relationships that I was building. That's why I'm sitting here. And then there was some extra cool stuff that I did on the side that I can talk about.
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, she was really managing her relationships in such a way that it made her sitting there and justifying everything that had happened make sense, because people had seen it. They watched it throughout the entirety of the game. It wasn't like they needed to hear about it at tribal council. They're like, oh, I won immunity, and now, oh, here's this idol I'm going to play, and then that's going to be their big flashy moment. No, this was very little intricate details of her game that just came together at the very end.
Right. Now, of course, part of the reason she was saying that was to reject Jake's arguments. I mean, even though Jake didn't really think he had a chance to win himself, you still got to make sure you knock down their arguments just in case.
Oh, sure.
And yeah, I know it was pretty much the only tactic he had, but saying he was taking big swings while the other two weren't doing anything is not a winning argument in my book. It tells me that those other people had set themselves up well and didn't need to take big swings to get into a better position.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, yeah. So he tried, but that was never going to win the day.
Yeah.
But Jake knew his goose was cooked. He told Mike Bloom, when Final Five didn't go my way, it's just like, I don't know what I really have. I felt like even if I had won individual immunity, thrown myself into fire and won, that's still a really, really tough argument. It's unfortunate, but I kind of had the expectation that it was not going to go my way before even going in.
Yeah.
And yeah, that probably explains why we didn't see Jake following up on what he said in the pregame about how you don't have to be 100% honest at Final Tribal Council. And he wanted to bring lying back to that part of the game. I was looking forward to that, but there was no point. I mean, what was he going to do? Get up there and say, I've been secretly controlling the whole game.
I know.
Worship me, So yeah. All right. Well, with that, it is about time to wrap things up. So, what are your final thoughts on the Final Five?
Well, I'm sure that you have an incredible thing prepared for the final thoughts on this group of five. I will say this. Thank you to each of you for giving us an entertaining season and a great final episode. I'm truly impressed with each of you for various reasons. I know that sometimes it's hard listening to people break you down and talk about little components of your game. I've been there and now I'm part of it. So but I appreciate you all so much. Each of you, Dee, Austin, Katurah, Jake, the four of you were great. Julie, I love that you were coming back and representing the moms. I think that's awesome because we haven't seen enough of that where you get such positive representation. Each of you represented yourselves so well and what you brought to this table. And so kudos to you all. Thank you for giving us the season that you did. Jake, you were my winner pick. You will always be in my heart. I appreciate you as an ADA to another ADA. Thank you for the incredible work that you do in life and that you brought everything that you could to this game and you gave it your all. I know things didn't work out, but I truly appreciate you. Austin and Dee, I don't know if it's going to be a thing. If it is, good luck. If it's not, good luck. I don't know if you will stay together or not, but if you do, I hope it's all for the best. And Katurah, listen, I'm glad you went to law school. I'm really glad. From one lawyer to another, it was a great choice. You're doing a great job. Excellent ability to get to where you are in life, that you've been able to overcome so much. So thank you to each of you. I truly appreciate you all. And all right, take it away, David Bloomberg.
While Dee and Austin went to the end with each other as two of the biggest threats facing off, they made sure to get rid of the other threats first. Julie was friends with everyone and had played both a very social and cutthroat game. If she had made it to the end, Austin at least worried that she would take it down. On the other side, Dee worried about Katurah. She had kept a low profile, but there was the fear that she could explain her game moves and detail why she deserved to win. She was well-liked and an excellent speaker, almost as if she were a lawyer or something. So she had to be taken out as well. Jake, well, he wasn't a threat. He tried and tried and tried, but he could never get anything going. That made him safe for Dee and Austin to take to the end, but also was almost predetermined to end up the way it did for him. And then there were Dee and Austin, the showmans who worked together but also fought it out for themselves. They had been allies since the beginning, but while Austin had been hiding the work he was doing, Dee was more out front about it. People had worried about her since the merge, with Jake saying in interviews that they discussed taking her out then. But she was too insulated the whole way. He told Mike Bloom, I think when you do have your threat up for that long, and then you get to the end, that's super hard to overlook. And that's not to take away from Austin's game at all. I think any critique of Austin's game is not so much that Austin played a bad game, but I think Dee is just that dominant. It'd be hard for anyone to beat Dee. Katurah had similar thoughts to what Jake said, also saying to Mike, I was so clear that if Dee makes it past 5, Dee deserves to win. I just felt that she was the biggest strategic player. She had done the strategy side, the emotional side. It was really clear. Obviously, they were not the only two who felt that way. Austin played a great game and might have won against just about anybody else, but he wasn't against anybody else. He was facing Dee. As Jake said at the Final 5 Tribal Council, it was about both numbers and relationships, and Dee had both. One played off the other as her relationships turned into numbers, and all of them protected her. She knew what was going on and was able to react, to pivot, to take out those who could become troublesome, and to keep around those who could help her out. In short, although Dee was part of a 4-person alliance who worked as a group to control the game, she stepped above and beyond the others, making the moves that benefited her in particular, and both with and without them, directing the flow of the game. And that is why Dee won and Austin, Jake, Katurah, and Julie lost.
She's fantastic.
Yay. Yay. Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations, Dee.
Trying to make my
I know. I didn't say that yet, but yes, congratulations, Dee. It's just really incredible to see such a strong individual win the game and that everyone is just like can rally behind. So it's just nice that that's what we have happening.
Yes. Now, we will, of course, this is the finale podcast. We may have a post-finale Q&A. We will see. There may be other people involved. We will see. The way this hits right up against the holidays. And
it's terrible.
It's just difficult to get everything together. But anyone can still keep up with us on social media.
Yes, I am at Jessica Lewis 89 on Twitter, and I'm also at Jessica Lewis 6789 on Instagram. You can certainly reach out to me on either of those, message abilities, whatever, social media. See what I'm posting. I don't post as much as I used to, but we'll see what happens. I did find a really fun video of Jeff Probst that I did post the other day, so that was quite amusing to watch. But David Bloomberg over here, he is all over the social media platform. And even though Survivor is done, I'm pretty sure that this guy has a lot of things planned up and coming. So check him out on his Linktree, which, ta-da, here it is. He's putting it up so everyone can see all of the places you can find David Bloomberg.
Yes, I am at Linktree/David Bloomberg with a dot before the EE in Linktree. You can also find me on most text-based social media like Twitter and Blue Sky as at David Bloomberg, and on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram as at David Bloomberg TV, and also Threads because it's connected to Instagram. Now that Survivor and the other big shows are over, probably won't be posting 4 videos per day. Probably more along the lines of like 2. But I'm still going to be posting lots of stuff. I've got some clips still from the US Survivor finale. And I, once we get to the true off season, I have some clips planned of previous seasons of kind of Survivor flashbacks.
Fun. Love this.
And then, there's not much of an off season when it comes to reality TV because the Traders UK starts January 3rd and the Traders US starts a little more than a week after that. So I will have plenty of clips on those things. And I'll also be helping to recap both of those Traders podcasts on the Tradar, which is TRAIDAR. You can find wherever you get your podcasts. Might also be doing some interviews related to a couple of the shows that I was covering over there. We have to see. It's holiday time, so it's hard to work that all out. So other than that, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. You can get access to all the different special podcasts Rob does and the Facebook group, the Discord, all those different things. So again, that's robhasawebsite.com/patron. Also make sure that you're subscribed to all the reality TV RHAP Ups podcasts by going to robhasawebsite.com/RHAP Ups feed. Even with Survivor ending, like I said, there's going to be Traders coverage. There's going to be other coverage that will be on that RHAP Ups feed, which is all of the podcasts that don't specifically have Rob on them.
So I can say thank you?
You
said now. What's next?
Well, no, the only other thing was just, like I said, I already mentioned it once. We may be back here. If you have questions you want us to answer for a Q&A, let us know. Just know that if we do it, it'll probably be, like 2 or 3 weeks from now. So we will gauge.
You'll have to miss us in the meantime.
That's right. Try, miss us the way Dee missed Austin when he was swapped to another tribe. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you to everyone at RHAP Ups who does not just the editing. So thank you, Scott St. Pierre, for leading the charge on that, but for all of the incredible content that is put out, not just for Why Blank Lost, but all of these shows that are posted and all of the various things of entertainment value that are put forth. It's just an incredible amount of work that they all do. So thank you to everyone. And thank you for support that David and I receive doing this podcast. It's, I don't know if we should say goodbye just because we might be back with another, podcast. We'll see what happens. But in the meantime, thank you everyone for listening, for sticking through with us this entire season. Again, I can't say enough, was an incredible season, an incredible group of people. Thank you for the entertainment that you provided to all of us. We love Survivor. We love the show. David and I might complain about a few things, but of course, why wouldn't we complain about a few things, right? That's part of what we do. So thank you so much for listening. We truly appreciate it. And David, thank you, as always.
Yeah. And, even I should note, even if, like you said, this is goodbye for this season, we'll be back in February, mid-February, to discuss the preseason of Survivor 46. So
Crazy.
It will be a very short farewell for now.
Short.
Yes. So yes, but thank you, Jessica, as always, for people have no idea how busy this season has been for you, and yet you've been here.
Gosh.
So I appreciate that. Have a great Christmas and New Year. Happy holidays to everyone out there. In the meantime, people can find both of us on social media, and we will see you soon. We'll be back before you know it, one way or another. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Happy holidays. Bye.